It all really started with a wooden paddle. Not one like this, but with holes drilled through it to cause welts when beaten on our naked buttocks. I've never challenged my father on his irrational beliefs until now. I was very smart even as a small boy and understood the incongruity and the inconsistencies of my parents' irrationality. I also recognized the fake explanations of, quote, government, unquote, and the, quote, political process, unquote, at around 12 when I was introduced to the John Birch Society. Just because my parents and hundreds of thousands of other people in the church I was indoctrinated in didn't want to face the reality of life and death, my parents were duped into believing that which makes no sense and that which empirically could not exist. But I digress. My father was a self-proclaimed, quote, Christian, unquote, who believed in an afterlife because to not exist after was too frightening to him. However, he did not exist before birth, so not existing made just as much sense. But what was the craziest thing was that how could a, quote, God-fearing man, close quote, coldly, maliciously beat all of his dozen children many times weekly. Rarely was it in the heat of the moment because, like I said, he designed the paddle, spending hours woodworking to get the most perverse pleasure, seeing his children's bare buttocks beaten with the implement of design until red. Then there was the irrational belief that all food needed to be, quote, blessed, unquote, and this was the kicker. Did saying some words over the food change the chemical composition of the food? I became vegan years later and could objectively observe the fallacy of thinking that barbecue could be made into a meal that did not have any detrimental effect. In fact, when my mother had an infarction in her leg, no one ever considered, first of all, that barbecue really was not an adequate food for a human being's consumption, and more importantly, that all of those prayers were just wasted breath because the fundamental atomic makeup had never been altered to any degree as to protect those who consumed the inappropriate food. One of the things, quote, Dad routinely punished us was for that which he called, quote, lying, unquote. Most of the time it was just withholding the truth. If we accidentally broke something and he found out about it, he made sure we recognized our lack of value. We, the children, were to be beaten because the object was of infinitely greater value than we. And if we hid the fact of the accidental breaking of a useless object, but later was discovered, then there were double the beatings, one for hiding the fact and two for the accident. Now what did he lie about? It was not about some superfluous object. It was about the nature of beliefs of the, quote, sky ghosts people have historically believed in. I wonder if he ever considered the horrendous harm he caused by touting the unique belief of one supreme being, while ignoring the other 9,999 that he did not believe in. So basically he was 99.99% atheist. So I think that this type of egregious sin, he should drop his pants and take at least one lashing for all the, quote, gods, unquote, he admitted telling us about. And one more for teaching only his irrational belief. Even in a world before the internet, Greek and Roman mythology was taught in government school, so we were exposed to a small part to a few of these others. but he never was able to explain why his irrational belief was superior to any of the irrational beliefs throughout history. The church held your family hostage, claimed that if you want to live with your family again in the afterlife, you must live, quote, worthily, unquote. The list of requirements was huge. You had to go to church every Sunday, etc., etc. But curiously and strangely, not beating your children was not on the list. But their approach was very subtle. If you could convince the people that there was a life after death, they could convince you to do anything to get the benefits of the awaited blessings. Just one minor problem. There is no empirical proof that any person ever, after the electrical chemical brain activity ceased, has ever come back to life. So I apologize to all you zombie fans. There is no zombification ever going to happen. Brain dead is body dead. But I still do not want to accept the finality of death, especially when my beloved companion of 9 years, 4 months, and 14 days was taken from me because of cancer. Let me divulge the scam. They claim that first of all that sky ghosts exist and that people would become zombies in the future, and the only way that you could continue your family life afterwards was to be a, quote, faithful, unquote, idiot. No masturbation or any sexual activity to keep yourself, quote, morally clean, unquote. What a farce. I never ever understood why they were so concerned about sex. But the most important, and that which they claimed less emphasis because they stated that, quote, tithing was a donation, not an obligation. But in order to be a faithful idiot, it was imperative to pay 10% before taxes, called tithing. What filthy lucre, what a scam. I fell for it for many, many years. The most distressing was I never really grieved for my deceased wife. I was deprived of this more experience because of the stupid, irrational beliefs of the church my parents got duped into attending. And I helped that futile organization grow. I didn't used to be rebellious. I was a missionary, black plaque, white shirt and tie. I always had another mission with me, all that. But there were things that happened to me that were black, the darkest black, that should have shaken me awake. I would just mention one thing. When I had a, quote, mission president tell me that a couple of members wouldn't give references to me because they didn't trust me. That hit me like a blow in the solar plexus. But I had only been there for a couple of weeks, and these people didn't even know me, and they had probably never even spoken to me. Looking back, it was laughable and ludicrous. Being paired with a former drug addict and not even being informed of the fact, and when he went into withdrawals, imagine the terror of being in a foreign country, seeing him shaking in a fetal position and not knowing what to do. It was actually my understanding of the farce of government that got me interested in the Corbett Report, and through him I discovered Stefan Molyneux, as he amplified and quantified the understanding of the farce of government. But one thing he mentioned were some facts that empirically could not stand. That a sky ghost could not exist. How was it possible? How come he didn't just fall down? How could you have a consciousness without a brain? How could you have life without birth nor death? And if this sky ghost really was omniscient, he would know what he was going to do next Thursday. He could not change it. Therefore, he could not be omnipotent at the same time. He knows when you're good. He knows when you're bad. Well, that sounds like Santa Claus. I discarded this fantasy, back in the first grade? I remember the lie they told me about Satan Claus, and I wondered why they would lie to me. However, it made it easier to accept the fantasy of the sky ghost. Now I still believe in the higher power. Our subconscious is 7,000 times more powerful than our conscious mind. It fundamentally gives birth or creates our conscious mind. It exists before our conscious mind gains consciousness. I think Stefan Molyneux explains it best in his book Against the Gods, page 27.
In all these phases, there is a deep and consistent sense of a vast and powerful consciousness that lies outside the range of our conscious ego, which contains deep and mysterious elements of eternity, which existed before us and will continue to exist after us, which informs and guides many, if not most, of our decisions, reveals its purposes and intentions through visions and dreams, frustrates our vices and supports our virtues, and responds indirectly and metaphorically to abasement and supplication. It is scarcely a novel insight to point out that our minds are divided between our conscious ego and our subconscious. Our conscious ego needs little explanation. It is the self-aware part of us that responds to willpower, focus, attention, and has direct access to the memories that we have accumulated in our lifetimes. It is a precise and astoundingly powerful tool that, in a very real sense, can be called the most mortal part of ourselves, since it grows and develops with us, and will certainly die with us, as will all of our personal memories. However, there exists below consciousness, or surrounding consciousness, the subconscious, whose processing power dwarfs the puny efforts of our conscious mind, and which also contains an element of eternity within itself. Our conscious memories are specific to our own lives, as are our more conscious choices and plans. I may dream at night of something I experienced that day, but the capacity for the experience of dreaming is not something that I have chosen, but rather something that my subconscious mind has developed and inherited and refined over millions of years. The subconscious mind, which controls everything from our heart rate to our breathing, to the increasing uneasiness we experience when in a dangerous situation we have not yet noticed consciously, is like an eternal guardian angel, or avenging devil if we have done evil, which is constantly prodding us with interfering emotions and sensations, discouraging us with fear and guilt, spurring us on with desire and pleasure, lecturing us about our choices in nightly dreams, whipping us on with short-term lust, while simultaneously cautioning us with fears about the long-term stability of our sexual partners, to name just a few. When we think of religion, we think of a puny consciousness, that of man, embedded in an eternal, infinite, and seemingly omniscient consciousness, which never shows itself directly, but which takes an enormous interest in us, and evaluates our choices and preferences, and rewards us and punishes us, and responds in maddeningly oblique ways to our direct and painful supplications. Gods are also experienced as existing before us and living on after us, which directly relates to the quasi-eternal nature of the subconscious, which existed prior to our conscious mind and memories, even in the individual, and which is the ancient foundation upon which the temple of our ego was built. The mind of God is also considered to be vastly superior to that of man, Is this not also an exact description of the subconscious, whose processing power has been estimated as 7,000 times that of the conscious mind? Man is considered to be a creation of God, and God is a deep and eternal consciousness that has existed forever. Is this not an exact description of the relationship between the conscious ego and the subconscious? As a species, and in our own lives, our ego evolves out of our subconscious, which is why we cannot remember our very early years. I have an arm, which I can call my arm in a sense, but it is not really my arm, because it existed before I experienced an eye. My arm preceded me, since it developed in the womb, and my ego had no part in its planning or creation, but rather my ego grew out of my body many years later. My arm, my body, and my subconscious existed before me. And certainly my body will exist after me, though my ego will not be around to watch it decompose. Thus, when we say that man is created by God, what we really mean is that the ego is created by the body, which precedes the ego, both individually and collectively. My arm preceded my consciousness by years, and human arms in general preceded my particular arm by millions of years. It is in this sense that we are, in fact, created by an eternal pattern that precedes us. However primitively we may have anthropomorphized this basic truth.
Therefore, the concept of a higher power that creates humankind is still a valid one. It is fundamentally the relationship of our subconscious to our conscious mind. Now, another fact that I considered was that everything we experience is literally interpreted within our skull, within our brain. And because the people thousands of years ago did not understand this concept, they portrayed an externalized version of their subconscious to explain it. However, sky ghosts never existed and never will. To my parents' credit, they did do a few good things, and we did have some good times together as a family vacations, etc. My mother was a stay-at-home mother, which did give a little stability to the family relationship. My father was a hard worker and taught us work ethic. However, if you live in a place that weekly a hurricane or tornado destroys your house, it becomes impossible to construct anything on that. I understand that both of my parents were severely abused as a child and into adolescence, which seemed to be one of the main reasons they got together, to escape their horrible family environments. However, they just recreated many of these same elements, which in turn harmed me and my brothers and sisters. I did not beat my children, and there was no paddle with holes drilled in it hanging in the kitchen. Why did they continue the cycle of abuse they suffered from their parents? Why didn't they seek counseling? Why didn't they read any books on parenting? In fact, I challenged my father on parenting styles, and he just ignored the suggestions. Whereas I was abused, I knew how it felt, so I stopped this cycle of abuse. Things were going fine until the demise of my wife. Then without her, my childhood abuse caught up with me, because I had not gone through the grieving process to understand what I had lost as a child, emotionally, intellectually, etc. And I imploded and just went numb. Unfortunately, my son suffered a lot because of that. I have not fallen from grace because what people call, quote, sin, they call an invisible, quote, disease that does not exist. What really has fallen are the shackles that I was previously bound because of an irrational belief in a lot of things that really never existed. But now that begs the question, what is, quote, sin? Many times it's referred to as a spiritual, quote, disease, whereas all real diseases have specific signs and symptoms, quote, sin does not. You know you have the chicken pox if you have itchy red welts all over your body, generally accompanied with a fever, etc. Every disease is caused by a specific agent, either bacteria, virus, or other microorganism. What are the signs and symptoms of, quote, sin? How would you recognize a, quote, spiritual fever or, quote, spiritual welts? What is not detectable to the senses, nor through empirical testing, does not exist. Period. Gravity exists. We know because of the effects. So if sin does not have any detectable effect, how could you be so sure it actually exists? How could sex between consenting adults, just because they do or don't have a government document, constitute, quote, sin? Or if one participates in, quote, self-love, where is the harm? Everyone recognizes that rape, murder, and theft are wrong and immoral because they violate the non-aggression principle and infringe on the rights of others. Quote, sin, unquote, was just an invention of priests and other religious usurpers wanting to get control over others to charge for their snake oil solution. I don't fall for that, and neither should you. In all religious indoctrination, there are telltale signs, and you've seen them, but not wanted to notice them. And remember, the concept of a higher power that creates humankind is still a valid one. It is fundamentally the relationship of our subconscious to our conscious mind. Now, another fact that I considered was that everything we experience is literally interpreted within our skull, within our brain. And because the people thousands of years ago did not understand this concept, they portrayed an externalized version of their subconscious to explain it. However, sky ghosts never existed and never will. It is time to discard this old outdated concept, invented by superstitious and primitive people, since there is no empirical evidence to the contrary. Remember, these same primitive people believed the earth was flat, and the earth was the center of the universe, and everything in the universe went around the earth. If they made mistakes in these major questions, they could have made errors in their concepts of sky ghosts. And I'm letting you know the other 10,000 sky ghosts that people have worshipped. I'm letting you know of the other 10,000 sky ghosts that people have worshipped throughout the ages, so you can have a correct perspective. Contemplate that if you were born in another country, you would probably worship another sky ghost. Oh, by the way, since you don't believe in the 9,999 other sky ghosts, you are basically 99.99% atheists. Life is too short, too precious, to waste on vain superstitions. You know how a diesel engine runs smoothly on the proper fuel? Well, I love the way my brain runs with all these superstitions and fantasies. Would you ever consider filling up your fuel tank with diesel faith? I'm filling my brain with reason and not superstition anymore, because I really want to get somewhere in life, and I want to avoid wasting time doing vain, futile activities like going to church and paying to sustain any priests or religious leaders. Now you know what happened to me. Maybe it's time for you to do the same. If my life experience can save you, a fellow traveler, from the same pitfalls that I fell into, then I feel this has been worth the hours and weeks spent in putting this together. For more information, please visit freedomainradio.com or fdrurl.com and thecorbettreport.com. And if you are an ethical person,
live long and prosper.